fine after. Okay, I think we can get started. Thanks for being here. I'm Deepak Rajagopal. I'm the International Energy Studies Group. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Badri Narayanan. He is coming from he's on the faculty at University of Washington, Seattle. He's an economist there in the School of Environmental and Forestry Sciences. He started off as an engineer. Then he got a PhD in economics from the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in India. He has worked a lot in doing international economic analysis in various capacities. So he's really an expert in international economic analysis. And he's really an expert in analyzing the energy, environmental, and trade impacts of renewable energy in computer general equilibrium setting. It's a pleasure to have him here. And he's going to present, and he's one of the guys who actually also, like many of us in the lab, really balances academic research with having a lot of policy impact. He does work very closely with various international multilateral policy-making institutions in various governments around the world. And so he's presenting a paper that he's working on that is jointly co-authored with the authors mentioned here, titled Estimating the General Equilibrium Effects of Changes in Air Quality from Alternative Fuel Technology. Right. I think we go for 40 minutes. Okay. 40 minutes?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Deepak, for the introduction and for the kind hospitality and inviting me here. So this paper is an ongoing research project we have been doing with Research Triangle Institute based in North Carolina. So Robert Beach and Yang-Chia Kai, these are my co-authors who are based in there. And we also have Catherine Antonio, who also used to be part of RTA, and she has recently joined the Department of Energy. So in this paper, we are basically trying to understand the impact of facilitating the expansion of alternative fuel technology vehicles on the environment and health aspects. And so we use, like what Deepak mentioned, we use a kind of model called computable general equilibrium model, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So we show only very preliminary results. I try to explain more about the model and how it works and so on, and I show only a couple of slides about the results. So I'll first motivate the topic. Why is it interesting, and first of all, what is the topic and so on. Then we use this particular CGE model called ADAGE. So I will explain a little bit about how it works and what are the features, what are the data sources and so on. And then the second aspect of the modeling here is health impacts. How are the health impacts calibrated and so on. So for that we use a program called BenMap, and I'll discuss about that, and then I'll discuss about the basic results we got so far, and then I'll talk about conclusions and the caveats in the study, and also some future extensions that we are planning. So the main motivation for this study is to see how different air pollutants and the fuel technologies, the different types of fuel technologies interact with the economy and also with health aspects. So one thing is that this particular model called ADAS model, it used to have just one transportation sector before, so it was very difficult to do any kind of analysis like this. But now my co-authors and I, we were able to disaggregate it into different types of vehicles. That actually immediately motivated us to think about this kind of analysis. So why don't we, so now that we have this kind of disaggregation, why don't we, think about the expansion of these alternative fuel technology vehicles and its economic and health impact. And the second aspect is about the different types of air pollutants that were introduced. So previously mostly were concerned about CO2 emissions and maybe to some extent some of the greenhouse gases, but we also have the details on particulate matter now in the model. So we thought it will be good to explore the pollution, the different types of pollutants related to alternative fuel technologies. And last but not the least, we also wanted to look at the health benefits. There is an expanding literature on how pollution relates to health. And in fact, for this purpose, we used a model that was developed by EPA, US EPA, called BENMAP, and I'll explain that later. So we thought, this holistic analysis of looking at the economic impact on one side, air pollution impact on the other side, and the consequent health impacts on the third side.
Are you going to tell us a little bit more about what ADIT is?
Yeah, that will be my next. I'll go there next. And yeah, so this is, I'm just motivating it, how this is all coming together. And yeah, my next topic is about the overview of the model. So
thank you for accommodating.
Yeah. So basically, this is the expansion of the model, like applied dynamic analysis of the global economy. So I must also mention that I'm not a developer or an expert on this model. This is the first paper in which I've been using this model. My co-authors are actually developers and experts on this model. So this is a CGE model, a computable generative model, and I've mostly worked with another model called GTAP, Global Trade Analysis Project. And all the CGE models have a pretty similar theoretical structure. So if you see these explanations here, so you have different agents in the economy, like you have this agent-based models. So similar to that, here also we have different types of agents. We have households who consume end products, basically consumption goods, and they choose between domestic and imports. And it could be personal goods, maybe like actual physical goods, or it could be services. They could also purchase transportation services, for example. And so this is about the households. And then you have producers, and we assume that they maximize profits. So it's a perfect competition model where the producers maximize profits. There is no monopoly or oligopoly here, which is something we could potentially model, but so far we haven't modeled them. So there is zero maximizing profit maximization problem, and the constraints are basically constant elasticity of substitution structure. So basically there is an elasticity between different factors of production. So you have land, labor, capital, and natural resources, and there are intermediate inputs. So this elasticity is between those different inputs is determined partly by calibration, by model calibration, and partly by econometric analysis. We do some econometric analysis to estimate these elasticities. So to what extent labor and capital can substitute each other? To what extent the factors as a whole can substitute the intermediate inputs? So all these kind of assumptions are made when it comes to production function. So this, you can think of this chunk as utility function for the households and demand systems, and this chunk is more like the production function for the firms. And so it is a dynamic model, as I mentioned, and there are two versions of this model. One version that focuses entirely on the US economy, and it has different regions in the US, and that is a forward-looking model. And by forward-looking model, what I mean is people make decisions today based on their current, past, and future consumption. So they are forward-looking in the sense that they anticipate their future levels of income and consumption and so on. So that is forward-looking. Whereas we don't do that. The version that we use is a recursive dynamic model, in which you just think of one period at a time. So you are today you have some you have an income, you have your prices, and you make your decisions based on that. And tomorrow you do the same based on the set of options you have then. So that is the recursive dynamics. You solve every year recursively. And here we have how does dynamics happen then? So you're only solving 1 year at a time. So how does the model move to the future? So these are different factors. These are different drivers of dynamics in the model. The first driver is labor supply, the growth in labor supply and labor productivity. And we have some baseline estimates of that. So there are some demographic models, and this International Institute of Advanced Systems Analysis, IASA, in Vienna, they have come up with a wide range of baselines. What would be the population growth, what would be labor growth, and so on. As you know, this sustainable socioeconomic pathways. So we take those estimates for the labor supply growth and for labor productivity growth for the next few years. And then we have capital accumulation coming to savings and investment. So savings happen at a country level. Different countries save based on what is their income and what is the consumption. And those savings from every country are accumulated globally, and then they are redistributed to different countries as investment. And that redistribution happens based on the rates of return in different countries. So if a country has some fundamentals improving, costs going down and production increasing, then investments are going to increase in that country. So this investment, the savings that is collected across the world is redistributed as investment based on the changes in rates of return, which in turn depends on the costs and the scale of production in different countries. So that is what I mean by capital accumulation. So investment happens, and then, like, let's say in time period T, there is some investment happening, and that gets added to the capital used in T+1. So you make investment today, and you start producing using that in the next year. So that's how capital accumulation happens, and that is what builds over time. And you also have some changes in stocks of natural resources based on exploration of resources and so on. And then you have a wide range of technological changes in the model, which we can either keep them exogenous and untouched. We can say that there is going to be no technological change, or we can say that there are different technological changes that will happen. And these are the things where we get a lot of contributions from engineers and technologists who have a good sense of what is happening.
So just a clarification, how do you endogenize technological change in these models?
So we mostly keep it exogenous. If you want to endogenize it, let us say that you have, so output is endogenous and productivity is exogenous, technological change is exogenous, right? So if you have a sense, if for example you have a target, like you have an emission target, or you have a production target for solar energy in the next few years, then you can make output exogenous and you shock it, and then you make technological change endogenous. Okay. So in this case, what you are trying to find is what is the technological change required to reach the target. Yeah, that is how we do. But and this can also be done for the past data. If you in the past, if you observe the production, and you probably don't know what is the technological change, so then you can actually swap it and find it out in the past. And that way you can also understand how the model treats technological change. So you have a sense of technological change, we have some estimates, take TFP and so on. We can compare that with what the model gives, and that will help us how to shock it in the future. These are the different dynamic aspects in this model. In a forward-looking model or in an overlapping generations model, so these kind of models, there are many more things happening. This is kind of fairly simplistic. in those models, they'll have, today's consumption depends on the consumption, the expected consumption in the next few years. There's going to be a discount rate for every year and so on. So we're not getting into those complex problems. And also when you do forward looking models, then you're also thinking of things like perfect information. You're basically, information is perfectly symmetric. Everyone knows, there is a kind of a sense of certainty. You know what is going to happen tomorrow. So there is probabilities there, but still you need to have that sense. So we don't get into those things. We just say, yeah, we just think about today, not worry about tomorrow. Because that also has an implication for savings here. So the savings in this model is a residual. You have an income, you have consumption, and savings is residual. But in a forward-looking model, maybe you can actually model savings even more rigorously. You can say that, yeah, I'll save more today because I want to consume more tomorrow. I'll consume less and save more today to consume more tomorrow. So those kind of things are absent here. So savings is just a residual. So that's kind of the pros and cons of this recursive dynamic system.
So you said you don't get into the issue of, perfect information. So the consumption is, or demand is empirically based?
Empirically based, yeah.
Okay.
So it's based on, so demand, to give you an example, if you look at the demand system, we have demand depending on three things, broadly speaking. One thing is income, and second thing is the prices of those commodities, so when you're talking about demand of a particular commodity, and the third would be the prices of other commodities. So we have income elasticity, own price elasticity, and cross price elasticities. So these elasticities are empirically determined.
Okay. So they include also all the market imperfections and so forth that are there?
Yeah.
Because you're using empirical data.
Empirical data, so implicitly they are captured. Yeah, implicitly. We don't. Yeah, capturing them explicitly, like quantifying each imperfection, would be a lot of complex work. And we do, for example, when I was talking about this on the production side, I was talking about profit maximization. And the other alternative could be incorporating some kind of markup. Like here you have, when you say profit maximization, basically everyone tries to maximize profit, and that results in zero profits basically, surprisingly. But the thing is, in reality, we have companies that are monopolies, there are oligopolies, there are cartels. To incorporate that, we need a little more information on market structure and so on, which we can incorporate. So that can be done. In a similar way, the complexities in consumption behavior also can be modeled more. But like you rightly pointed out, doing it empirically gets us closer to the reality in terms of the rigidities and so on. So for example, if you're thinking of a durable good, then empirically we would probably find that the elasticity is relatively low. So it doesn't matter even if you earn a lot, you're not going to increase the consumption because it's a durable good. I'll just consume it once. So that way it will be different from fast-moving goods and so on. So these kind of things are captured. Okay, so far I talked pretty much about the macro aspects, and you may probably wonder, what are the sectoral details? Like these are pretty, whatever I said holds true for every sector and so on. So what about the details on transportation and so on? So we do have pretty good representation in terms of energy. For example, we have different types of energy. It's not just one energy, or it's not even just like coal, oil, gas, but also renewables and so on. So everything is broken down. And in terms of transportation, we also have all the different types of vehicles, and that's how we are able to do this. And in terms of agriculture, we have different crops, and we also have biofuels. And of course, there is biofuels. That's a link between agriculture and energy. So, and that also relates to land use change. This food versus fuel debate. So when the demand for biofuels increase, what happens to food prices? What happens to land use? So all these things are also captured here. And we also have the greenhouse gases estimated at sectoral level. And so because of all these details, we felt that we now have a model with which you can pretty much do a lot of different types of economic and environmental policies, and particularly how each of the sector responds to these policies. So we have when it comes to modeling, we have broadly speaking, we have three types of models. There are different combinations and permutations there. But one type of models are like partial equilibrium models, where, for example, you can just focus on energy and take the rest of the economy as given, or maybe do some kind of back of the envelope calculations there. So, but pretty much your model is very rich in energy, but it's kind of agnostic about the rest of the economy. So that's partial equilibrium model. General equilibrium model is like it's kind of like jack of all trades and master of nothing. So it pretty much captures everything in the economy, all the sectors, but it's not like a specialist model in a particular aspect, right? So that's the trade-off between these two models. And you have econometric models, which can fall under both categories. Some econometric models may deal with one or two sectors, and they can be labeled as partial equilibrium. And there are economy-wide macroeconometric models which are very close to CGE models. So these are some broad categories, and the reason why I emphasize this here is that this is a model, although it's a CGE model, and CGE model usually suffers from kind of a macro bias. It has sectors are more aggregated and so on. But here we have made a lot of effort to disaggregate these sectors, energy and transportation and so on. So that makes it suitable for this kind of analysis. So in terms of countries, it's a global model. It contains the entire world, but only these three countries are defined as individual regions: US, China, and Brazil. And the rest of the countries in the world are aggregated into 5 regions. For example, India is contained in rest of Asia, and so on. So this is like more of a, if you ask me why we did this, I wouldn't have a clear answer, because it was more of a artifact. Biofuels is something?
These are big agricultural countries.
Yeah.
And biofuels are biggest in these 3 countries. So it seems like it's driven.
Yeah,
by
it was done.
biofuels.
Yeah, it was kind of artifact that way. It was done, meant for that. It was built for that a few years ago, and we got stuck with that. So that's one thing. But this particular paper, our main focus was actually US. So it's not a big problem. But in future, we are planning to extend this to India and other countries, and in that sense, I'll talk later about how we are planning to do this in kind of a GTAP kind of framework. So now I'm coming to some of the data sets we used. So from the JRC, EU, European Commission's Joint Research Center, they have a pretty good emissions data set for, like based on the global atmospheric research they have. So we used these air pollutants, both greenhouse gases and particulate matter and so on. So this was actually disaggregated by sector and source, and we used that. So these are the different sectors: agriculture, energy, manufacturing, all these sectors. And the transportation also, like both road and water and air transportation. So basically the way these pollutants are modeled, or we have pollution intensity, like what is the emission intensity per dollar of some sector, like production in some sector. So that exists. That's pretty standard to do for greenhouse gas emissions. That has been done quite commonly in many CGE models. But we also did the same thing for particulate matter. So particulate matter and other aspects. So basically they enter. So we have this in the production function, we have land, labor, capital, and intermediate inputs, and then we introduce these pollutants as another competing aspect there. So basically you can, for example, you can invest more in capital or invest more in capital used in renewables, and that will reduce pollution. So that there is that kind of substitutability that is possible. it happens through substitution between the cleaner fuels and dirtier fuels, and eventually reducing the air pollution that way. So that is the explanation for that. And in terms of the transportation, the transportation itself is divided into these categories. We have light passenger vehicles, then we have road freight and road passenger, rail freight and rail passenger. So we have, like broadly speaking, road, rail, air, water, and others. And within road we have freight and passenger. Within rail we have freight and passenger.
So you have an emission factor for each pollutant for each of these sectors?
Yeah. That is how we did it. Yeah. So.
But then there's also an emission factor for fuels, no? Like coal,
Yeah.
oil, gas.
Yeah, so we have here, the last point, we talk about the different fuel. So so this is at a higher level. This is at a higher level, we have these different types of transportation. The next level is the actual vehicles. What are the kind of vehicles that are used? And that's where you have, compressed gas, electric battery, and so on. So here we have emissions at that level. Yeah.
Technology level.
Technology level, exactly. Technology level, not at that level, yeah. And then we can aggregate it at that level, yeah. So yeah, we, as you can imagine that, data is very scarce for these things. So, but fortunately, BERKELEY has developed a pretty good data set which we used, and we also drew some aspects from Bureau of Transportation Statistics and Department of Commerce. So yeah, this GCAM model has been pretty helpful for that. They have publicly available data set for this. So if you look at the last point, what we say is that, yeah, we have this alternative fuel vehicles, all these types of vehicles are there. There should be a way for them to enter the market, right? So some of them may not even exist now. So how do they enter? And that is actually based on when they become competitive with conventional technology. So this can happen in two different ways. And I'm going to show only one way in the illustration later on. That is introducing a carbon price. If you have a carbon price of $10, then maybe the conventional fuels are competitive or cheaper, but then with this $10 carbon price, these become like they get a level playing field. Okay, they become more more competitive, and they enter the market. So that is how we model. So this is a relatively organic way of modeling it. The other way I've typically done this is give an external target. I'll just say that, okay, alternative fuel vehicles will increase by X%. But we felt that this is more organic. We can say that, okay, we don't know what is going to happen to them, but let's say that, yeah, carbon price, we have some sense of how the carbon price is going to increase. So let's introduce some carbon price.
So when you model the alternative technologies, are the parameters in those technologies fixed, or there are learning curves of them also?
So at the moment they are fixed, but typically in all the CGE models, including this model, the parameters are usually fixed, but the data, like I talked about technological change, right? So because when there is some technological change, either exogenously or endogenously happening, the parameters won't change, but the data is going to change. It's like how much input are you going to use to produce a given output and so on. So the actual elasticities are going to depend on it's a combination of nonlinear combination of parameters and data. So to that extent, there is some dynamicity. There is some dynamic evolution of behavior basically. So parameters themselves are given and static, and we could also think of making that also dynamic.
What you mean the parameters, elasticity parameters, right?
Yeah.
Not the input-output coefficients of the technology. That is.
Yeah. Actually.
That was the question, right? Learning on the technology.
Yeah.
You're talking about technology.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking about the input-output coefficients. Yeah. By default, input-output coefficients are fixed, but given this technological changes that we are introducing, that changes. And I think, but my answer was probably partly related to that, but also a bigger question of combining elasticities and input-output coefficients. So when you combine the two, then there is a dynamic evolution. So yeah, these are things. So now I'll try to explain it in a simple way what is happening in the model. So we have households in the model, we have government, we have firms, and we have international trade. So let's say this is US, and these are other countries. So in the US, the households provide labor, land, capital, and income. Labor, land, capital, and natural resources to the firms, because when you say households, they own all the endowments. They own everything. Because when I say households, it also includes the people who are investing in the companies, right? So the capital owners are also part of households. Households own the capital, they own land, labor, natural resources. They own all the endowments. So now these endowments are basically also called primary factors. So they provide all these primary factors to the firms, and the firms, and in return the firms pay them income. So you are providing your labor, so you are getting wages. So the wages are coming from firms to households. You are providing your capital, so you are getting return on capital. So these things are happening here. And here the firms are providing goods and services to the households. They are selling products, and the households are, in return, they are paying for them. So they pay for the household expenditure. So now you have government sitting in between, and it's collecting taxes from everyone, and it's and it's also giving some free money, some transfers, social transfers, and also in addition, government also purchases. It also does expenditure, public procurement from firms, and actually all these things at every level, like households can purchase goods and services either from domestic firms or from foreign firms. So the imports happen at this level, and then it's distributed. Like here, there's an importing agent who decides purchasing goods from different countries. Like what is a mix of imports that has to happen, and that is based on everything. The whole thing is based on the relative changes in prices. So for some reason, if let's say this is China and this is US, maybe we can think about the trade wars that are happening now. So because of trade wars, the tariff escalations, the Chinese goods are going to be more expensive. So firms will buy less of Chinese goods. The importing agent will buy less of Chinese goods. So all the agents in the economy, government, households, and firms, they will buy less Chinese goods and more of other goods, and potentially maybe more domestic, probably because there is a less import substitution. So yeah, this is a very, very broad accounting framework way of interpreting the CGE model. Previously I was talking about the behavioral aspects. This is more like accounting. So everything. So if you look at it, this income that you see, the income and expenditure should equal in the economy. So all the accounts match. So here are some features. Having shown you the general framework, we have all the greenhouse gases and energy details and transportation. So I mentioned about all these things, and all these different types of policies can be done. Maybe environmental impact of different policies, or climate change adaptation versus climate change mitigation. So these things can be captured. Emissions reduction and fuel economy standards. So like not this model, but one of the models that we developed at Purdue, GTAP model, has been used here in CARB for setting up the fuel economy standards, the blending standard for ethanol and so on. So these inform these kind of policies, and taxes, carbon taxes and so on. What should be the optimal tax, and also changes in emissions intensity and biofuel equivalents. So for example, we did a study on Paris Accord, the implications of Paris Accord on global economy for the World Bank using the GTAP model, and there our default results said that many countries are going to lose and some countries are going to gain. The countries that are rich in renewables are going to gain and others are going to lose. Then we said, there is something that is missing in that model, which is it doesn't capture the fact that renewables prices may come down. So we then introduced that into the model, and then we were able to see that the losses were mitigated quite a bit. So these kind of things can be done. We can accommodate various realities in the economy and plug it into the model. Okay, so yeah, these are the geographies. You have, like I told you, US, Brazil, and China, and then in the rest of Asia, stagely it also includes, Australia. Basically, rest of Asia Pacific, we could say, and then Europe. Actually, we also have EU 27 as a block, and the whole of Africa, rest of South America, and then pretty much rest of the world, basically. Even Canada is part of rest of the world. So this is the kind of aggregation we have, and these are the sectors that we have at an aggregate level. So energy, industries, agriculture, and so on. So and of course for energy and transportation, we also have further disaggregation in terms of commodities. So we have light duty passenger transportation, heavy duty passenger transportation, and freight transportation. We also have different generations of biofuels and byproducts from biofuel manufacture. So these are the different sectors. So now from the IPCC report from Edgar, so we looked at the baseline forecast for particulate matter 2.5 and in kilotons. So you see that it's increasing from 2010 to 50. It's pretty steeply increasing in some of these rest of Asia, rest of Latin America kind of regions, whereas in the US it's pretty much standstill, not much increase, and in China it is also increasing pretty rapidly, and Europe also it's increasing, and rest of the world, whereas in Brazil it's kind of relatively flat but much more active, much more increasing compared to the US. So we got this kind of a baseline. So without any policy changes, this is what is going to happen. And now what we did was we said, okay, now let's say that we did different different assumptions on carbon prices. So when you say that the carbon price will be $10, and then that's going to be the decrease. For $20, it's going to be a little steeper, and so on. So it looks almost linear. So you increase the carbon price, and then you see a decrease in PM. But there is a small, it's not the slope actually varies. So when the higher the carbon price, the greater the slope. So it's going to decrease faster. And this is the case for the US, and for China it's a little. The story is the same, but when it comes to like 50, when you increase it to like 50, then there is a steep decrease after 2040. So what we are seeing here is for a country like China, the higher carbon price has a non-linear effect over time. So for US it's pretty linear, but in China, like in the initial levels, it's not that non-linear. It's almost linear. There is some non-linearity, but it's almost the same. But you see this kink once you increase to like 40. Once you increase to 40, then you see the kink in 2045, 50. When you increase to 50, then you're seeing the kink right here in 2040 to 45. So we saw this kind of behavior.
What is driving that?
So I think that is mainly coming from the price effects. So when you're increasing carbon price to so much, it's kind of reaching a boundary condition kind of thing, where the prices are so high that the consumption decrease a lot, and that is driving down emissions a lot. It's not, I wouldn't say it's like an organic reduction in emissions, it's more like a forced reduction, your consumption-based reduction. You're reducing because your prices are prohibitive, and then you're forced to reduce.
And it's also non-monotonic. goes up first even with the policy. Is that a policy? Yeah, that's the.
This, right?
So it's for the first.
Here, yeah, you're right, for the first three.
For the first, even with the price.
It's that is a rebound effect, actually.
These are carbon prices, not, I mean, they're not specifically targeting PM.
Right, right.
Exactly, yeah, that is,
Effect.
that is one
So
aspect.
eventually, like, electric trucks take over from diesel trucks or
Yeah.
something, and that.
Yeah, actually, that's right, that's very, very important. There is some kind of substitution happening between GHG
Yeah.
emissions and PM. We also did in another,
It's just inertial till
Yeah.
2025, right?
Yeah.
It's just,
So-
yeah.
they're on that path, and
Yeah.
taxing carbon isn't gonna change it
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah, and to some extent, you can also, there is some story of rebound also here, when you, in the initial stages, there is some kind of, so when you're using more renewables, then you know that the emissions are going down, but then you use more than, like, your total consumption of energy is more than before, and that leads to some kind of rebound effects. But we don't see that so much, we only see that in the first thing, and also because it's kind of the policy is geared towards carbon and this is PM. So, yeah, the next aspect, how, am I doing well on time or I'm overshooting? Or
Another 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
Well, 15 total, right?
Okay.
For Q&A, so you go to one with Q&A or?
Well, that normally includes Q&A.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So,
You go to one.
your,
Okay, okay.
your call.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll probably finish in like 5 to 10 minutes, yeah. So, so far I've been talking about the adage model, and I even showed you some baseline and so on. So now the next thing we did here was to link the pollution outcomes with health, actually. So US EPA has come up with this environmental benefits mapping and analysis program, where actually you can, once you know what is happening to particulate matter and other emissions, you can actually map that to health benefits, and how many people can be saved and so on. So we did that, actually. So what happens is, so basically it estimates this BenMap program, they estimate the relationship between pollution and some health effects using parameters derived from epidemiological studies. So definitely this is not like a survey-based kind of study or program, but we know, for example, that if air quality is 10% worse, there is 5% greater incidence of some particular disease. Right? So we have that kind of epidemiological studies have been used to derive these parameters. So yeah, it does not. It is air quality changes are exogenous to this model. This model does not have anything to do with economy or air quality. It is totally a health model. So we input the air quality change. So for example here, so we input this air quality change as this delta PM, and then we have the other variables in the model. Then you can get what happens to delta Y. So what is the initial baseline, let's say per capita income, what is the population exposed, and this beta gives beta is the key thing, the effect estimate. What is the effect of PM on the health benefits, health losses basically. Like if PM increases the health, there is going to be a loss in health. So the incidence, basically incidence, by incidence I mean the incidence of diseases, right? The number, proportion of people who get the diseases. So the incidence is from epidemiological studies, we see that it's pretty much monotonic. If PM increases, there is greater incidence, and that's what we use for this model. So okay, so now the health impact functions are basically the impact of emissions, PM emissions on health. That is based on the epidemiology studies, and for the baseline incidence for selected outcomes, or basically these outcomes particularly, because we want to look at the diseases that are directly related to PM, particulate matter. So these are basically cardiopulmonary diseases, asthma, lung, pretty much the diseases that have to do with, that deal with lungs actually, because of inhalation of particulate matter. So population, again, there is we start with the base year population, and then there are various different granularity possibilities here, like the gender, region, and age range, and so on. And it also monitors the changes that we feed in terms of the air quality change outcomes. Then we also have, it also has country and region maps. So we basically, what we did was, when we did the analysis from the ADAGE model, we took the effect of the policy of increasing carbon price, for example, on particulate matter, and then for a given region, and then we feed them in terms of shape files into this model, and then this model can compute the health effect for them. So that's how we did it. So now I'm coming to results. Some very preliminary results we got. I'm just going to do 2 slides focusing on that. So if you look at, we look at PM 2.5 reductions, and in 2020, assuming a $10 carbon tax. So when we do that, we see that in Africa there are 350 million people affected by who are exposed to this, and we will be able to avoid 8,000 deaths. And the confidence interval, we did a 95% confidence interval we did some variations here and use Chebyshev's inequality. So we get the mean and standard deviation by drawing this on a distribution, and then we get a range lower bound and upper bound. So we do that, and basically the mortality that is reduced is 18% for Africa, and 2 deaths per 100,000 are avoided, 2.3, and the air quality change after waiting for the population is like 0.26, which is an increase in air quality. So that is also computed here. So you can see that this is giving you an idea as to if the carbon price is increased to $10, there are various changes that are going to happen in the economy, including the changes in alternative fuel vehicles, and that is going to drive a reduction in PM 2.5, and that reduction in PM 2.5 is going to result in this kind of reduction in mortality and a reduction in the number of deaths avoided, and also the increase in air quality. So this gives you a complete picture in one sense. And in the next, we also see that in 2050, the effects are much bigger. So you see, mortality is gone down so much, and deaths have gone down so much, and air quality has visibly increased across the world. So this is to give you an illustration of how this pans out. And we mainly wanted, this was a new part of this model, so we wanted to highlight these health outcomes more than anything else. But we also had done the economic impact, what is the economic impact of this and so on. So we haven't, I haven't put them here, but the economic impact was also kind of mixed. In some countries, like for the US, it was very small, small negative, because you're moving away from the vehicles that are more commonly used now. And in Europe also, it was like, for all countries, the economic impact was very small, and it was actually the losses were slightly higher for the developing countries because of the substitution that is very costly in those countries, whereas in the richer countries the losses are relatively low. And this is not even, we haven't accounted for some of the things that I just discussed with some of the faculty members here a few minutes ago about the reduction of costs of this alternative fuel vehicles. So we don't take that into account. So even without taking into account the price dynamics in alternative fuel vehicles, we see only small losses in terms of economic ways.
What's the
So-
meaning of more than 100% of baseline mortality?
So this is basically yeah. So it's difficult to interpret because only in this example only maybe 60,000 people would die in the baseline, but we can avoid all the deaths, and on top of it, it's difficult to interpret. So maybe we should just say 100%, like all the mortality coming from particulate matter is gone. So maybe we should just reinterpret these numbers in some other ways. Maybe we should just say we should cap them at 100. So the entire mortality is gone. So that's the, because we have to have some kind of a binary function here. So either if the deaths are only 60,000, then we should just stop there and leave them at 100%. But at least
66,000 is the avoided
deaths.
deaths.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is maybe it's 143 because, for instance, right now in 2010, there is 30,000 deaths. Under business as usual, you
Yeah.
have gone to 66,000.
Yeah.
So you're avoiding 66,000 in 2050, but that's 3 times of today's deaths. Is that one possible interpretation, the way you're computing?
No, if I understand correctly, I can check with my co-authors, but actually I think this is baseline for that particular year,
Okay.
not base data, but that particular year. So the baseline is also dynamic, right? So that's why I think we should reinterpret it.
So related to the counterfactual for that.
Counterfactual, exactly. Yeah, related to counterfactual. Yeah. We
Then
call
that doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. Then it should be maximum 100%. Yeah, it should not be more than 100%. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's why we call the baseline in these models. Baseline is actually counterfactual. The baseline is also time series. It's not only the base year, but also the whole time series. So yeah, so basically what we found so far is that this kind of a model where we combine economic activities and their reallocations and the energy sector changes and the health, the air quality and the health impacts, we can actually capture air quality improvements quite nicely, and we can also capture the reduction of mortality rates and the corresponding increase in more healthy population available for labor supply, which is something we did not get into, right? We just said that so many people are saved, and that's it. That's the end of the story. We could have also done a closed loop. Yeah, so many people are saved. Now there is more labor available in the population, and so on. So we didn't get into that, and I'm doing that for another project, but that is something we could think of here. The second thing is, there are some caveats here. At least these 2 caveats. One is we have to the emission reduction is coming from our CGE model. So there is a carbon price, and then we observe a reduction in emissions. So there is scope for more model validation, because the CGE model behaves in a particular way. So you increase the carbon tax and there is some response, but we could probably validate that looking at some past data and see if the estimation of this emission reduction or the estimations are actually in line with reality or not. So that is something that needs a little more work. And another thing that needs work is, ideally we should have some primary survey and do these things, to see how the exposure to particulate matter affects the health of people and mortality and so on. But we just relied on existing studies on that. So that is another thing where one can, at least we have to say that, yeah, we did not do all this, the mortality is not coming from our own data, it's coming from the studies. So, and yeah, we focused on PM 2.5 because the data for other pollutants is not that comprehensively available. So we kept our focus on this. So maybe if you had focused on, like if you had taken some other particular matter or something, maybe our results would have been different. Yeah, the last thing that we are doing currently is this particular model is kind of designed for only these 5-6 regions that I talked about, whereas we are more interested in the other regions, and we're interested in other countries, and also more this also the data is relatively old. The data used in this study is relatively old. It's like 2011, whereas now we have a 2014 GTAP data. So we are planning to use that. This is the latest one. So yeah, that's so I think I was right on time. Hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Just a quick clarification, is that $10 carbon price global? Like if everyone adopted that $10
Yeah.
price? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Global. Yeah. Right. And great question.
It will be interesting if some countries do it and some don't. Then that will be
Yeah, we could do that actually. In the model, we have carbon tax for different
I think
countries.
you should put it on the OECD countries and
Right.
then take it out of
The
see what happens.
developing countries. Yeah, that would have been interesting, I think. Maybe,
It's a good one.
yeah, great point. That China kink we may not have observed that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it would be pretty degrading, I would think, for the health impacts that you
Yeah.
found, more carbon.
I think what might be interesting is to actually add the societal cost of carbon as tax,
Mm-hmm.
because essentially, if it's a tax, it gets recycled in the economy, right? Like
Right.
tax revenue, you're just changing the prices of the products.
Right.
So that's what he's doing. Huh? The $10 per ton is a carbon tax.
Yeah.
But that $10 is not the societal cost.
Yeah. That is.
Yeah. That is a random
money
number.
spent
Yeah.
Do we know what the society? I mean, the US has some recommendation, right?
No, there is a nature climate change paper which
Yeah.
estimates the societal cost of carbon by country.
Yeah. I've seen that actually. That is,
And put that on each country.
yeah.
Yeah,
That-
and I think we are not saying money is transferred from somewhere. I'm just like